All right, I would
Hold
like,
on, Ann.
oops, okay.
All right, Ann, we are live on Facebook with Texans for the Arts.
All right, thank you. I'm Ann Graham, Executive Director of Texans for the Arts, the statewide arts advocacy organization. And our mission is to secure, protect, and grow the public investment in the arts and to support public policy that supports the arts and culture sector. We are kicking off the second of our now weekly Wednesday Texans for the Arts Advocacy Action Update. It's a long mouthful, and that is to just bring snapshots of what is happening at the federal and the state level and even at the local level in terms of the arts and culture sector. We'll be bringing in different guests each Wednesday and talking about matters that are important to all of us in our communities, whether you're directly engaged in the arts or as an advocate or as a leader or an artist or a member of the community. So we welcome you to join us every Wednesday at 4 to 4:15. Today, I would like to introduce and welcome Peter Gordon, who is the Director of Federal Affairs for Americans for the Arts, which is the national arts advocacy organization. Texans for the Arts is a part of that. Welcome, Peter. I'm going to read just a very brief bio about Peter and his credentials. He joined Americans for the Arts in January 2019, and prior to that, he served as the Associate Director of Government Relations for the Council on Foundations, where he focused on tax policy and advocated on behalf of foundations on Capitol Hill. Before joining the council, he was a government relations specialist for the National Association of College Stores in Washington, D.C. And previously, he worked in Capitol Hill in both the Senate as a staff assistant for former Senator Roland Burris from Illinois, and in the House as a legislative assistant for Representative Stephen Lynch, a Democrat in Massachusetts. So delighted to bring Peter onto the floor and to ask Peter to give sort of an update on the post-general election, the lame duck session, what it looks like potentially for what's the 117th Congress look like, where are the power structures, COVID relief funding, and ultimately what arts funding may we look for. And at the very end, we have an advocacy action alert to push for you to reach out to your congressional leaders as well. So Peter, join us, please. Welcome.
Thank you, Ann, and it's nice to thank you for having me on. It's great to be here. I will just give a brief overview of sort of what happened with the elections and how that's going to impact the arts going forward. As many of you know, it was a big day a couple weeks ago, but the presidential election wasn't actually called until about a week and a half later by the news networks. So we're looking at President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, and she would be the first woman, first Black person, as well as first Asian American vice president that we will see in office. Of course, it's a little convoluted still because the current president has not conceded yet, and there are still some legislative battles that he's fighting, judicial battles he's fighting for around recounts in certain states like Michigan and Pennsylvania. Although when you look at the math in terms of the amount of votes he would need to overturn in those states, it does not look possible for him to do so. So we will be having a Biden-Harris administration come January 20th, 2021. Let me see if I can share my screen. I just have a couple of slides. Can you guys see that?
Yes, thank you.
See if I can make it full screen. So this is what the Senate map looks like right now. So right now it's the power structure is 48 Democrats, 50 Republicans, and there are 2 Senate seats that are outstanding. In Georgia, they have a law that says if a candidate does not get over 50% of the vote, then the leading candidates will go into a runoff election. And so there are two runoffs there. Those seats have traditionally been red seats and are both currently held by Republicans, Senator David Perdue and Senator Kelly Loeffler. But Georgia is a state that finally, for the first time in a long time, went blue with President Biden narrowly winning it. So there is a slight chance that those seats can be overturned by Democrats. If they do overturn those seats, it will be a 50-50 balance in the Senate with the Vice President-elect Harris, who would be breaking the tie. So in that case, you would see a majority leader, Chuck Schumer, who would be able to set the agenda for the Senate. However, with such a narrow majority of literally one vote, a tie-breaking vote, as well as a couple conservative Democrats, such as Joe Manchin, it would be pretty tough to do any sort of ambitious agenda that you might have heard Democrats talk about several weeks prior to the election, when it looked like there might be a blue wave with Democrats adding seats in the House, taking the Senate by a decent margin, and then winning the presidency. And then I just wanted to show you quickly the House map as of today. This is a map from the New York Times. So right now there are still 12 remaining seats races to be called. Democrats will control the Senate next year. You need 218 votes to, or sorry, the House. You need 218 votes to control the House. They have 219 right now. Republicans have 204. And I can stop my share now. But it will be a much narrower majority than they had in the current Congress. So let me see. Currently, it is 232 Democrats to 197 Republicans, with one Libertarian who caucused with the Republicans and often voted with them, and 5 vacancies. So it's going to be a much narrower path for Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was just reelected today to be Speaker for the next Congress. Most of the Democratic leadership stayed the same. There are a couple. There was a race for Vice Speaker, which Catherine Clark from Massachusetts won, beating out David Cicilline from Rhode Island. But the majority of the top structure for the Democrats stayed the same. In the House Republican caucus, all of their leaders stayed the same, and they actually did a pretty good job of flipping a bunch of the seats that Democrats had flipped in 2018 when President Trump was not at the top of the ticket, back to Republican control. And so right now they have a net gain of 8 seats, but they likely will get some more added to that for all said and done. And again, a lot of these races that are still outstanding are in California and New York, which they're super close races, and they're also still counting ballots that are coming in and have come in, provisional ballots from the military, et cetera. So we're still waiting to see what the final outcome that will be. But when it comes down to it, we're going to have a Democratic controlled House, either narrow Democrat controlled Senate, or through, as we are likely to see divided government. If I had to bet my money right now, I would think that Republicans would win at least one, if not both of those seats in Georgia, and so they would retain control. And so for when we're looking at what needs to be done, especially in the lame duck period, that there are 2 things that immediately come to mind. The first is COVID-19 relief. Republicans, Democrats have been trying to come to an agreement over the past 3, 4, 5 months at this point on a 4th package. Democrats have passed 2 bills in the House that have been much bigger than Republicans have wanted to pass on a party line vote. The HEROES Act, which was a $3.4 trillion relief bill, and a skinny version of that HEROES bill, which is about $2.2 trillion. Senate Democrats have brought to the floor a bill of about $500 billion in relief, but that didn't even pass a procedural vote. And so that's where the disconnect is in terms of those two packages. Speaker Pelosi and Secretary Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury, had been negotiating, and the White House had been looking at going towards a bigger package, but without Republican Senate support, that really went nowhere. And so they were never actually able to come to an agreement. And right now, there have been no talks at all since a little bit before the election on sort of that COVID relief package. The other thing that really needs to happen is funding for the federal government. The fiscal year 2021 started on October 1st, but the House had passed 10 of their 12 appropriations bills on the House floor, had passed all 12 out of committee. This summer, Senate Republicans hadn't even released what's called the 302Bs, and those are the allocations for each of the 12 individual spending bills until the beginning of this week. And so they had to come to what's called a continuing resolution, which was passed and signed into law September 30th, so the night before the federal government would have shut down. So now that has been pushed to December 11th, and they need to come to an agreement by then. Both Majority Leader McConnell and Speaker Pelosi have said that they want an omnibus spending package, and that means that all 12 bills will be combined in one big $1.4-ish trillion package to fund the federal government for the rest of the year. And so right now, that agreement is trying to come to fruition. Both the Senate and the House are negotiating on what the top line numbers will be for each spending bill. And hopefully they can come to that agreement this week in order for them both to work in terms of the amount of legislative days that are available before December 11th without having to potentially do another continuing resolution. A couple of the tricky things that are in those appropriations bills are around Homeland Security. President Trump has wanted a border wall and wanted money for a border wall. And so that's something that is a non-starter for Dems. And then both in the Senate and House bills, I believe both the VA and DOD bills, there's language that forces the military to change the names of any bases that have that were named after Confederate generals, and that has been sort of a non-starter sticking point for the president, who would have to sign these bills into law. And so that's something that is currently they're trying to figure out how to get around those issues. The one thing I will say regarding COVID-19 relief, while it looks unlikely it'll happen in this lame duck period, there is a chance that if they can come to an agreement on this omnibus and an agreement on what size package they want for COVID-19 relief, they would just bundle them together and have one vote sometime in early December, pass it, and that would essentially clear the decks for the Biden administration to sort of start fresh with whatever their agenda is. So that's something that Democrats would love to see. And Republicans do have more of an incentive to sort of deal right now because they are controlling both the Senate as well as the presidency. But again, the wild card, as has been the case for the past 4 years, is the president. And even if the House and the Senate were to come to an agreement, there's no guarantee that he would sign those bills, especially with what we've seen in terms of not conceding the election yet. But I guess Chief of Staff Mark Meadows was actually in the Senate caucus lunches today, and he did signal that the White House was open to an omnibus bill. So that gives us more hope that if they do come to an agreement, that will pass. Regarding arts funding, I know there was a lot of arts funding for the NEA, NEH, IMLS that was contained in the CARES Act and the skinny version of in the HEROES Act and the skinny version of the HEROES Act that the House passed. The House also included a version of the Save Our Stages Act, which is something that I know Anna's been advocating on, and Americans for the Arts has been supporting. While it did have some changes to what was originally introduced in the House, and we have been working with some folks behind the scenes, and now Anna's been involved in those talks to make sure that the eligibility for nonprofits stays the way it was when it was first introduced. There is a slight chance that if there's a big COVID-19 relief package that a Save Our Stages language would be included. But if they are talking about a more narrow bill that just would really focus on sort of PPP, second round of PPP for those that have gotten it. So replenishing that money, as well as things like state and local money, which Democrats see as a huge priority, and Republicans have signaled willingness to give state and local governments more money. So that might just be the size of the package, and we might have to wait until a Biden administration comes in, and hopefully a big stimulus bill at the beginning of next year. And then just circling back to the appropriations, we were able to get our ask of 170 million for the NEA and NEH passed by the House. So that's in the House bill. When the Senate released their numbers earlier this week, they had level funded the NEA and NEH and those other programs that we care about, MLS, CPB. So we are hoping that if you remember back to last year's negotiations, the Senate had the House had matched our Arts Advocacy Day ask of 167.5 million. The Senate came in at a lower number than that. And what they ended up doing was essentially splitting the difference and coming to a higher number than the Senate, but slightly lower than our ask. So with the House having 170 and the Senate being at 162.25 million, we would hope that that number would be right in the middle, would be perfect. Obviously, we'd love anything closer to 170, but we don't know that that would be possible. So we're continuing to work with our folks, our champions on Capitol Hill, and our coalitions here to ensure that the arts is taken care of in appropriations for FY 2021. So I think that's sort of all I have, unless you would like me to talk about something else specifically. Yeah.
I just have one quick question and then I want to wrap up. Obviously 15 minutes isn't long enough to learn about everything after the election by any means. My one quick question though, before I wrap up with some of the Texas statistics is, this will be the year for redistricting. And one, just like a 2-minute snapshot of what that would look like, how that's conducted at the congressional level, and also the implications of the census. I think people were under the assumption that Texas might be able to have larger census numbers and therefore obtain some additional congressional leaders. And we don't know where that's going to fall based on the slower response to the census. So in a nutshell, can you pick up on redistricting?
Yeah. So redistricting happens at the state level, and I haven't looked into it too closely, but I believe I saw something that said that Republicans will control 24 state legislatures, complete control, which would be either the single body or both bodies of the House and the Senate and the governor's mansion. Dems would have, I believe, 8. They would control 8 state houses, and I believe the rest would be mixed. So it does look that like Republicans are at an advantage in terms of redistricting, and these will determine what the congressional districts will look like for the next 10 years. So it's a really big deal. Regarding the census, I haven't seen anything on those numbers yet, but there was a push by the Trump administration to end the census early. They did, I think, it got extended a little bit, but they did end earlier than other administrations likely would have, which is bad for everybody in terms of it determines the amount of money that goes to different states and stuff like that. And so once those numbers come out, like you said, if Texas gains enough, has gained enough new citizens over the course of these past 10 years, they will get extra seats. Back when I was working in for my member from Massachusetts, when the redistricting happened, Massachusetts ended up losing a seat. And it was a huge deal because Massachusetts is a very Democratic state, so they were all Democrats in the delegation, but they were wondering what was going to happen and who was going to lose their seat, or potentially which members would have to be drawn into a district together to run against each other. Luckily, one of the members was on the older side, and he ended up retiring, even though it didn't look like he was going to at the beginning. So everybody's able to have their new districts drawn and still run in those same and run again, so nobody ended up losing a seat. But if it's a case where you're gaining representation like Texas might, it's awesome. But that means that other states are losing representation, and that is also a function of the fact that we have not changed the size of the House of Representatives, so that's going to stay at 435. So hopefully that answers both of those questions.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And only sort of in closing, in terms of the Texas delegation, we have 36 congressional leaders. We have 2 senators, Senator John Cornyn and Senator Ted Cruz. We participate in Americans for the Arts Action Summit, the annual Advocacy Day, which will be virtual again this year. It'll be in DC. It'll be in DC. And we'll be here in Texas. Putting together our delegation. And before that, we will be circulating and action alerts, ways to communicate. You can already send one to current congressional leaders at texansforthearts.com on our website, urging their support for another CARES and COVID relief package, or HEROES, whatever it will be called at this round. So they're still listening, and I'm heartened a little bit, Peter, to hear you say that it's not that they're not clenched necessarily to not try to pass something, but it's not a rosy picture, but we really need those resources. So your advocacy support is really important. Within the Texas congressional delegation, we've got 7 new congressional leaders that happen to all be congressmen. One of them actually transferred from one district to another district, but otherwise there are 7 new faces, and that means there's 7 new faces for us to get to know, and you as constituents to get to know. So again, we'll be communicating that information out through our newsletters and networks. I really think that's it for the moment. I can't thank you for giving us that overview and how important it is for you. All of you are listeners and our members, and we hope if you're not a member, you will become a member of Texans for the Arts. How important it is to know who your congressional leaders are. And then at the state level, of course, we'll do another session on the state of Texas after the election, but just how important those relationships are, and your capacity and opportunity to share with your elected officials why the arts and culture sector is so important to you and your community. So with that, with no further ado, we went a little bit over time. Thank you again. And we look forward to seeing everybody next Wednesday at 4 o'clock for another piece of the Texans for the Arts Wednesday Advocacy Arts Action. So thank you. Thank you, Peter. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.